All right, well, let's get going. So let me introduce the panelists for today. This panel is regarding sourcing trusted data to enable contextual decisioning for graph-based customer 360 insight. So it's an exciting topic. And let me introduce first Philippe Guiral, Managing Director of North America Fraud and Financial Crime Lead at Accenture. So welcome, Philippe. Good to have you.
Thank you very much.
Yep, and let me also introduce Martin Maisey, who is the head of Contextual Decision Solutions at Quantexa. Welcome, Martin, to have you on this panel.
Great to be here.
Good to have you. And as well, welcome to Kayla Burke, who is an account executive in data governance at OneTrust. Welcome, Kayla. Great to have you.
Thank you.
On today's panel at DataVision. So to set the stage, Martin, I'm going to turn it over to you. And Nana, if you don't mind advancing the slides for Martin, he's going to set the stage on this topic. So on to the next slide. Good, Martin, thank you.
Fantastic. I actually think that may be a slide at the end of the pack. But I'll start anyway. So
yes, 1 second. Let me just we'll back it up and get it into the right space for you. Just one more back. Keep going. There we go. And then one forward, I think, at this point, if I have it right. No, we're not. I'm incorrect. Sorry, Nana, if you just keep going back a couple more times. And thank you for being patient, our audience. Keep backing it up. Yeah, that should be it. And then if you have an ability to turn my screen on, I'm ready to do this. It might be easier for me to push the button on this. If you can share my screen. And guy panelists, thank you for being patient. So Nana, my screen is shared on my side. I think you just need to select me and then we're off to the races. There should be a screen share option for my screen as opposed to your screen. Well, Nana, failing that, if you can reshare your screen, you were very close to where to start. So if you want to reshare yours, we can go back up on that. I see Michelle has guidance. There we go. I think this is, yeah, it's me. Good. Okay, great. All right, Martin, there we go. Over to you.
Fantastic. So gaining insight into customers based on a true 360-degree view is one of the most pressing analytics use cases for organizations today. And it's worth putting it into the wider context of some recent eye-opening research. So IDC class only 5% of analytics adopters as high performing. And this group are seeing real, very significant results, but that's where the good news ends. Although the vast majority of them believe that operationalized analytics deliver high business value, even in this elite group, less than half have achieved it. And 4 times as many companies, so that's 20%, aren't seeing any return on huge investments. Remarkably, only 10% of data is being used for analytics, and respondents laid much of the blame for that at the door of data management. Next slide, please. Most organizations still lack a data integration architecture. It's difficult for analysts and data scientists to discover, understand the lineage of, or use data. No single version of the truth and variable quality data are still problems in the majority of organizations. And it's difficult for everyone, including business users, to trust data. And that causes a litany of problems in the customer world. Reporting across divisions is cumbersome and manual. Sales teams don't have access to information and insights they need to proactively and meaningfully engage with customers. Risk is not fully understood due to a myopic view of clients and relationships. Customers suffer poor, fragmented experiences across digital and physical channels, and everyone has a slightly different perspective on what customer means. The underlying data is a big part of the problem. It's siloed across regions, product lines, and business divisions, internal and external data sources. Much of it is personal data, which brings its own and significant compliance requirements. And these problems are holding back at least 3/4 of companies in their operational integration of advanced insight. But there are new approaches and technology coming to the fore that can revolutionize the way that we unlock value from customer data. And I'm very much looking forward to discussing them today. So thanks for inviting me on, Mike.
Thank you, Martin, for setting context. And this is a pretty heady discussion, so I look forward to digging in. Let's start first, Martin, if you don't mind. In the subject of this panel, it talks about graph technology. So let's go right there and say, well, that's, what is that? And how is graph being used to transform businesses?
So graphs are ideal for representing the complex relationships that are present in the real world. 360-degree insight shouldn't just be about who your direct customer is and how they're interacting with you. It should be about their relationships, what they share and how they interact with others, and then their relationships and so on. So a really great example of this is business customers, which is something that most people have to deal with. They're not one company. They often have complex, deep hierarchies. They've got informal relationships through shared directors. They've got deep supply chains linking them together and so on. And it's really only graph that has the flexibility to model this well. So just to take 2 examples of great use cases that benefit from a graph approach. The first is that graph technologies are great at finding customers that you really don't want on your books. And it was one of the original applications of the technology. So for financial institutions, detecting and investigating money laundering activity has historically been a huge challenge. And that's because the indicators of it are deliberately obscured, and they include complex flows and cycles of money, the graph problem. In this area, graph-based detection models can deliver 95% fewer false positives that people have to deal with, as well as flagging more genuinely suspicious activity. But they're also great for finding customers that you do want. And one example of a successful strategy for prospecting is to find potential referral opportunities via shared directors of both your existing customers and suitable types of prospect. And one set of people that we worked with found a 90% time reduction in doing that, identifying those opportunities, coupled with a 50% conversion increase. So time reduction, but also better results. But getting that kind of success isn't guaranteed. So you need to create the right graph for a given use case, and then you have to use that graph right. That said, leading enterprises are now finding enough value from graph-based approaches. And what we're seeing is that they're building out now graph-based data platforms on an enterprise-wide scale, and that these are actually serving a large number of use cases.
Great. Hey, Martin, I think that's the wake-up call, right? And by the way, for our audience listening in, recently, Gartner Group, that the council partner with is basically stipulating that over the next few years, that over 70% of decisions in businesses will be derived from graph-based architecture. So Martin's comments about doing it with lower cost and getting more accurate insights simultaneously is the holy grail opportunity with graph. But there's another thing that needs to be thought of. And Kayla, I'm going to frame this question to you just from your experience, which is, what are the main factors that can determine whether data is verified as trusted to ultimately go into these graph solutions? And how can organizations verify that their data is actually trusted? Do you mind sharing that?
Sure. So I think that something that I commonly see and what I personally believe is we know that data is verified and trusted when we can say we have repeatable and scalable processes around data quality, data confidence, data accountability. If there's a specific audit process that the data has gone through and it's repeatable and scalable, you're able to find the source of that data and really ensure that you understand where it's coming from. And being able to ensure that there's a centralized solution within organizations really drives them to have that insight of, one, where that data is coming from, does it have repeatable and scalable processes around it? And once we understand that, is that data quality up to par? Is that data confidence up to par? And do we have accountability around that data? So I think that's something that I would say to answer that question.
Great, thanks, Kayla. Let me move over to Philippe. And Philippe, welcome to the panel discussion. Have you seen Graph used to drive a better 360 view of business? And welcome your take from being out with many clients and scenarios. How is the real world leveraging this capability?
Yeah, I think if we look over the last couple of years, we've seen a very strong adoption of entity resolution and network graph to drive better decision with the business. And I think for me, when I look at these two technology, like the main objective is really to break the silos of data that we currently see within most financial institutions. When I speak with my clients, the best way to explain this is that we're not trying to create a single customer record. What we're trying to do is create a single customer view. Because we know that the large data lake solutions take years to implement, and the cost value benefits are often not achieved. But with ER and Graph, we're able to create this single customer view within weeks, and then we can feed this information to the downstream platform. And for me, like one of the quotes from the Quantexa CEO that resonated with me like a few years ago is that you will not agree to buy a house if you only saw it through the doormail slot. You want to check the bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, the neighborhood, the schools around, the crime rate in the area. And this is exactly what we're doing with ER and Graph right now for the customer data. Is we are leveraging internal data from multiple sources, external data, and creating this single customer view of the customer that we can then use for many applications. And if you look at the business cases, it's really around many functions within the organization. It's customer intelligence, fraud prevention, marketing, AML, KYC, credit risk. So there's many applications for this type of solutions.
Philippe, thank you. I mean, you are bringing to the forefront that there are many exciting applications. And I heard some common themes. One is the ability to integrate different data sources, maybe even data sources outside of a company, to get insights that otherwise would have been very difficult to do before. And that Graph is opening up doors to quick addition of data and bringing insights out of it quickly for the end customer and the end business driver. So Kayla, let me go over to you, which is today, everyone, because of things like GDPR, CCPA, PDPB in India, I mean, every country and region in the world is implementing often very tough policies around data privacy protections. And it's not isolated to just the financial markets. It covers all industries. So there's no get out of jail on any of these things anymore. You can't ignore this. So the question is, what steps can organizations take to maintain regulation requirements and without inhibiting the use of data? It's sort of that catch. You want to protect data, but you don't want to lock it down so much that it's not usable in your business. So how do you solve that sort of intractable challenge?
Right. So we honestly want to go about embedding a solution in organizations that continuously updates these regulations and policies that are going to be updated, as you said, like they're coming out year by year, different countries, different regions. So how do we go about putting in a centralized solution that is able to constantly update that process? Another thing I like to think of is operationalizing the data process within an organization, right? So when we go about operationalizing this process, we have, as mentioned before, a repeatable and a scalable way to ensure that end users or users of the data within the organization are enabled and have more intelligent data. So instead of inhibiting them, we're actually finding this data, updating it with policies, identifying risks, keeping it well governed, and giving them more power to actually use the data versus inhibiting them. And why I say putting in these processes, a really great example to think of is, let's say we have a data owner or a data steward who works in an organization that left. We want to ensure that these processes and these being able to operationalize within the organization is going to remain long after different data users or data stewards come or go. So really building that sustainable operation within your governance program internally, I really feel that it gives more power to those users in the end.
Kayla, a great insight. You're really pointing to two things. You have to have the right governance structure and trained team to do it, and an architecture that unlocks your data, which is discover data that you may not have had access to before. And number two, allow you to execute in a way where you can have confidence that you're not taking undue brand and reputational risk along the way. So those two things together are often, not understood. If you do this right, it's not that you're locking down your data, you're actually opening it up to be utilized in a really smart way in the business. So thanks for sharing that. So Philippe, at the end, every executive wants better outcomes. Raise revenues, lower costs, improve efficiencies, and the list goes on. Have you seen this better decisioning outcomes come from these architectures? And you have some thoughts around that? That would be useful for the audience.
Yeah, definitely. And I think all these solutions are about making better decisions for your business, but also to implement a data-driven decision process. And so for me, there's three main factors, and I think Kayla already touched base on some of them. But if I look at the real benefits, is number one is allows organization to better understand the data and the data quality issues. We know that today, from a business point of view, only a small subset of data is being used because of lack of trust in the data. Two is really about creating this complete view of the customer data. We can move away from the product-centric view and transition to this customer-centric view with a full understanding of the customer behavior. And the third point is really around allowing you to enrich your data set with these third-party data providers. When you have additional data points, you have additional insight about the customer behavior, and this is where we can implement the data-driven decisions. So all of this combines, allows to build more confidence about the data that you have, and also make better decisions about your business and customers.
Philippe, thank you very much. So Martin, back to you on a question that it's one of my favorites on any discussion about new opportunities in someone's business. A lot to do here, a lot of potential, but also there might be steps to properly execute this. And this is a classic studio audience point of view. Hey, where do I start? And nothing gets approved without a business case. So what things would you start thinking about to advise this audience? Where can you start doing these things? And then what's the business case to present to top management?
Thanks, Mike. So I guess there's a couple of ways you can start broadly. So the first is that you could start by finding a really valuable use case, which has a really clear business benefit, and working very closely with the business to shape up what that looks like. And drive value out of it to act as a wedge for doing the rest of it. The really interesting thing, and I think interesting for this audience is that we see a lot of that going on. But the other thing which we're increasingly seeing is people start from a cross use case angle and looking at the data foundation, and using some of the techniques which Philippe referenced around building a single view of customer. So we call that entity resolution. The customer is a type of entity. And bringing together data using entity resolution, and then looking at the characteristics of that data and understanding what's the trusted view of it, what do the attributes of each piece of data look like, how does it join with all of your source data, and how trustworthy is it? Do the attributes kind of reinforce each other? And looking at an entity level at what your data quality is. And that's a much more powerful way of dealing with it than just looking record by record. So that's one way of starting. And the other thing that will give you is a joined up set of data that's fantastic for analytics and for exploring use cases and for identifying the use cases that you can build on top of that data asset and taking them out to the business. And then looking at typically operationalizing that after it's proven.
Martin, the other part of this is that business case and presenting this to top management. You've probably seen arguments that won the day and other arguments that got mired in bureaucracy and lack of movement. what advice on that? And then I'd like to move over to Kayla with a similar kind of question. So that business case to top management, what's working, and also maybe some cautionary notes on things to avoid.
Absolutely. So once you've started and got a foothold in understanding your data quality and building out these individual valuable use cases, in many cases, a business case to senior management can be built by looking at all of your decisioning use cases across the organization. And typically you'll find these are hugely splintered, and they will replicate huge amounts of data, do the same work in trying to join up that data multiple times. So there's usually a great use case for consolidating a number of those, and it means you have fewer vendors to manage, less operational complexity. But probably one of the most important things is kind of consistency of that data across all of your processes, so that at each of those customer touch points, you're presenting a consistent view of the customer and making those decisions consistently and understandably.
Great. Thank you, Martin. Kayla, over to you. Where start? I mean, what characteristics you'd look for as a starting point for a project to implement these kind of capabilities? And then what's the business case to top management to get going?
So what I see with a lot of my customers, so where I would say is to start, from my perspective and what I deal with every day, is to, one, begin by having that fundamental piece of being able to, one, identify and then classify the data. So it's really hard to make insightful decisions or put things into graphs if you have no idea where it lives, if you don't understand what assets that data is living in, how it's interacting with different vendors, internally, externally, different systems, on-prem, in the cloud. You know, there's just a massive velocity of data, a variety of it, and a volume of it that is just tremendous now. So I think just, one, getting a grasp and understanding that fundamental piece of where it is, what it is, and where it lives is really important. And, you know, presenting that use case to senior management, what I see is, as Martin mentioned, a lot of things are siloed today, and the power comes from being able to centralize, right? So how do we go about showing the power? And not only are we going to identify and classify data within this part of the business, but how is this beneficial if we have this real 360 view of everything within the business? How do we gain power as a whole to really embed and have that intelligence to make better decisions as a whole versus individual departments? And I think that's a really great use case that I typically see that my customers present a lot.
And Kayla, I'm almost your comments are the companion to Martin. Martin is, I think you just mentioned, if you can look at projects that consolidate data and remove the silos, and that's the point you're driving at, that will create insights that otherwise today the organization is not getting. And then that creates a series of wins, not just a single win for the project team. So Philippe, on to you. You've been out in many installations. All sounds good, but all journeys take a first step. What's a good place to do a first step? And then if you're the person carrying that ball to the top of the house, what is the argument you're making?
I think for me, like the main advice that I give my client when we go to this kind of engagement is be specific and focused when you select your first use case. Because there's so many applications of this technology across the business, it's really easy to get distracted and start too many use cases at once. So for me, it's always identify what is your biggest challenge, where do you think you can get the best return on investment, and then start small, validate the benefits, and scale. But if you start to do too many things at once, I think, based on my experience, is the best path to failure.
Understood. Thank you, Philippe. And thanks to our panel discussion. What I'd like to do is turn the opportunity for each of the two companies just to share a little bit about themselves. And Nana, if you don't mind toggling on my screen, that would be great. Awesome. There we go. So I guess, Martin, over to you for just the perspective on Quantexa, and then Kayla, over to you for OneTrust. Martin?
Sure. So Quantexa is a data and analytics software company. We've been pioneering meaningful data and trusted decisions through an approach that we call contextual decision intelligence since 2016. And our platform provides a contextual connected view of internal and external data. And that includes for 360-degree views of customers. It provides entity resolution, which I mentioned before, and what that does is finds the real world entities that exists in your data. And by doing so and linking up your source data, it creates an enormous graph. We then provide network generation, which provides which finds meaningful of that graph in for the context of making a decision, evaluating a customer, and so on. We provide contextual analytics that enable you to find features to take through and use as the basis of AI models. And we provide a UI for augmented decision making. So using the results of that analytics to help humans make accelerated decisions and realize those huge productivity speed ups that I referenced before. It can uniquely provide context to multiple enterprise use cases from a single instance. So it helps with this problem of proliferating data and proliferating systems. Yeah. We've been working with Accenture since 2017, so it's fantastic to have Philippe here. And they brought their vast customer and integration experience to bear in delivering Quantexa solutions. So I'd really like to particularly thank Philippe for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more, please do email us at alliances@quantexa.com. It's been a real pleasure being here today, and thank you, of course, to Mike and Kayla too.
Thank you, Martin. And Kayla, over to you for OneTrust.
Awesome. So OneTrust, we are one of the leaders for operationalizing privacy, governance, and security. But more specifically, I want to talk about data intelligence platform that we have today and how that really enables that knowledge graph that we've been speaking about. So what we like to do in this process when we start to identify and classify data is we like to raise the bar of that data. So when we start from the bottom, as you can see over here, we're moving to the top so that this data will be de-risked, it will be well governed and ready for any use case that is necessary within the business. So we start off by being able to scan and enrich your data across different platforms. We can do it across different types, such as structured, unstructured, semi-structured, whether it's on-premise, in the cloud. And we scan the actual data, not just the metadata, which is really important because once we actually create metadata about that actual data, we're able to drive that metadata into a data asset inventory or a data catalog. And with that, we're able to apply different business semantics into different processes throughout the business. The key here is that because we are tagging the data, we can associate different internal policies, encryption, masking of the data, and we can drive intelligence about that data into things such as a knowledge graph. So as you can see here to the right, you have incident management, risk management, semantic search, and much more things that you can embed across the data and infuse it with. So awesome. So when I think of data and going about identifying, classifying data, I tell all my customers to think of it as a foundation to a house, right? We can't build a framework on top of a house with no foundation. So it's that foundation and fundamental piece. And I love that this slide puts it in the middle so you can see that you do have the capability once you identify and classify to streamline those processes into other modules or something as Quantexa. But knowing your data and feeding it into another platform, we're creating that foundational piece that is powering Quantexa to make decisions for customers. So how do we get that insight about the customers, put that into a 360 knowledge graph, and then be able to have those insights? So this data can be any kind of data, right? So we're going to search a multitude of assets, whether that's on-prem, in the cloud, as I've mentioned. And although the modules that you're seeing here today are privacy focused, we do scan throughout any environment and for a multitude of use cases. So awesome. I think that, yeah.
Thanks, Kayla. And thanks to our audience today. I also want to just one more time thank Martin, Philippe, and Kayla for your materials and what you presented today. You can get in touch with them for follow-up. Great discussion. And for our team, I just want to let everyone know what's coming next. You have 2 options at this point. You can join the CDMC framework discussion with Big ID, or why data lineage is your answer to ESG by Solidatus, by just selecting one of those options as the next event in today's schedule. And again, thanks to the entire team on today's panel, and have a good day. We'll see you at the next discussion coming up now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.